Jeff Lauder. Jeff has a background in tree physiology, climate science, forest ecology, aquatic ecology, and statistical modeling with more than 10 years of research experience in the forests of the Sierra Nevada. His current interests include examining how climate change has already impacted and may continue to impact the Sierra Nevada ecosystems, ranging from water quality and stream health to forest drought and resilience. So we'll turn it over to Jeff.
Oh, I can get hers too.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me? Good?
Yep.
All right. So, yeah, my name is Jeff Lauder. I'm an ecologist with Sierra Streams Institute. Thanks for having me this morning. I'm going to be sharing some of our work on climate change impacts on the Sierra Nevada Foothill Watershed, specifically using our 2 decades of citizen science data to kind of get at this question. So we are a citizen science group in the Sierra Nevada foothills in Nevada City, California, that's been monitoring the Deer Creek watershed using a team of entirely volunteer citizen scientists, monitoring 17 sites, most of which since the year 2000. The Deer Creek watershed is a perennial foothill stream located in western Nevada County, where at all of the sites shown on this map, we sample all of the parameters listed on the screen according to the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program protocols. Should note all of these are measured by trained volunteers using calibrated sensors and then QA/QC'd in-house, except for nitrate, phosphate, and bacterial concentrations, which are sampled by the volunteers and then brought back to the lab to be measured by us in-house as well. We then also do biannual Benthic Macro invertebrate sampling, and we identified down to the family level, being a citizen science group, and we also have community members come in to assist with this identification and bug counts in-house as well. And then some additional analyses that I'm going to be sharing today involve some land cover analyses. So at the catchment scale, kind of actually following the stream cat flow that Anna was just describing, where any catchment scale data is within that site's catchment and all upstream catchments. We looked at forest cover in 2001 through 2016, agricultural cover, grassland, all the variables listed on the right there, and then also extracted normalized differential vegetation index, which is just a proxy for canopy cover along a 30-meter buffer along our stream corridor. And so using all this data, we definitely as an organization like to ask a lot of the same questions that other watershed monitoring groups ask, just monitoring our stream over time, which sites are sensitive to change, which sites are resilient, and just keeping on any like point source pollutants and stressors. But obviously the big elephant in the room and question that we'd like to start getting at is related to climate change. So we do know that over the last 100 years, mean and minimum temperatures have been increasing, as shown on the top left here. And then this leads to a concurrent increase in evaporative demand, or actual evapotranspiration, shown on the top right. And then a variable that we're interested in is climatic water deficit, or a measure of aridity, CWD. So you'll hear me refer to that throughout the rest of the talk also, shown on the very top right there, that has increased significantly over the last 100 years in Southern California, coastal California, and the Sierra. And then further, we actually know that in our 2-decade data set, we've actually experienced some pretty severe, pretty extreme climatic events that might help us to bound expectations of what may happen in the future. So for example, 2012 through 16 was one of the most severe droughts on record, the California mega drought, and true constructions of Palmer Drought Severity Index on the bottom left there, with more negative being more dry, show that going back 1,200 years, it was actually one of the hottest and driest years in over a millennium, 2014 in particular. And then 2006 and 2011 were some of the wettest water years on record. So we can use those to ask, just do climatic drivers contribute to or outweigh or work with land use change in determining water quality and biological response? And then what can responses to these extreme years allow us to do or to say about future climate change impacts on our watershed? So to get at those questions, we took 3 basic approaches. First one was just looking at trends over time. Second one was looking at using ordinations to look at how some of our sites responded to these extreme years. An ordination is just shown on the right here, just a way of visualizing how different or similar sites are based on measured variables. So for example, a dot on that plot that's on the far right has higher air temperature, total coliform, and a dot on the farther left has a higher precipitation. And it also helps with variable reduction. So if we have 2 collinear variables like nitrate and phosphate, we can choose one as a proxy for the other. And this helps increase our power in some more complex models, which in our case, we took a structural equation modeling approach. And this is a causal modeling approach where we can actually look at what is the direct contribution of climate, land use, or both in determining changes in the last 20 years in our water quality and benthic response, and then use that to project out into the future. In our case, the climate data we used was from the California Basin Characterization Model, which just takes publicly available climate data and downscales it to California-specific watersheds at a higher resolution. So looking at just the trend analysis first, this is just looking at the climate variables, all kind of put on the same scale. And really this was just to look at what's going on in our extreme years. So on the left, we have years in blue are wet water year records, and years in red are critically dry. And if we just overlay these on the plot and look at the dark blue line, which is precipitation, the kind of darker purple line, which is aridity, climatic water deficit, and the dark orange line, which is our canopy cover, a couple things stand out that we have to consider for later on. Basically, canopy cover seems to respond well to increases in precipitation within the same year, but actually the relative decline in canopy cover that results from drought is a lagged effect. So it takes about a year for canopy cover to decline following extremely dry years. And then also, again, we're seeing climatic water deficit is decoupled from precipitation. It's more driven by temperature than precipitation. So we kind of have to consider all of these separate determinants of how our biological community is responding relative to climate-driven shifts in water quality. And then there's lots to look at on this figure, but this is an ordination where we're bounding all of our sites within a given year, or all of our observations within a given year at one site within one colored polygon. So one polygon represents January through December, all of the measurements at a given site. So if it's smaller, there's less variance over the year. If it's larger, there's more variance. And if they're on top of each other, then they're more similar to each other, all of our sites. And if they're farther apart, then there's more variance in our sites. And really this was just to see, again, in our extreme years, in a wet year, all of our polygons are on top of each other, not much variance between sites. When we look at our extreme year, 2014, we start to see a lot more divergence among our sites. Just does show that, yes, our sites are responding to extreme water years, primarily on the drought side and less so on the wet side. Another way to look at this is just the size of kind of the average polygons outlining all of our sites, and we see it again, our critically dry years. They're much larger, much more variance than our wet years. So all of this was preliminary stuff that went into the construction of our structural equation models. So we used the ordinations to focus on the best variables that were proxies for other variables, and then also those which varied a lot across these extreme years. And this is a schematic of what's going on in the background of a structural equation model, a little key on the bottom to help kind of walk your way through it. Where the circles are what we call latent variables. These are kind of these abstractions that we're trying to measure directly with the things in these square boxes. So climate in this case was a function of aridity, precipitation, and maximum temperature, land use of percent impervious surfaces, canopy cover, catchment area, and percent forest change over the 16-year period in this case, and the best water quality predictors are listed on the bottom there. So what I'm going to show you is the best fit models, where the models in this case are testing the yellow lines here. So it's saying climate predicts water quality, land use predicts water quality, the dashed lines, so other candidate models, so climate influences land change, which then influences water quality. And what's going to be left on the screen are just these significant variables and relationships from the best fit models after testing all of those candidates. So for just the water quality model, the green lines here are positive relationships, red are negative, the size of the arrow is the size of the relationship. Starting at the top left, we see, unsurprisingly, increasing aridity over the last 20 years, along with decreasing precipitation. And that was associated with this increase in this thing called water quality. That increase is kind of a subjective thing here, because actually what we saw was a collapsing of dissolved oxygen, a dramatic increase in water temperature, and then a slight increase in pH and conductivity. And then we also saw declining canopy cover along the riparian corridor, and actually increasing coniferous forest cover at the catchment scale were associated with these same changes in water quality. So then we took this base model and added in our Benthic Macro invertebrate data into a model like this. And the biological data we used was a family level index of biotic integrity, or IBI, just a single index of score of our stream health. We know IBIs have kind of fallen out of favor, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then we also used percent tolerant and percent intolerant taxa, and then tested this kind of tangled web of other candidate models to see basically how all these things are influencing each other. And the best fit model here, interestingly, was pretty much the same model as the water quality only model, with the exception of pH and conductivity actually dropping out, so there were not significant predictors of the change in the biological community. And then we did see a direct effect this time of canopy cover on water temperature. So this shows kind of that shading effect. So we're seeing A loss of canopy cover is just going to increase stream temperatures because it's just getting more sunlight. And so all of these things on the screen were then associated with significant declines in our index of biotic integrity and in our percent intolerant taxa. So increasing aridity, decreasing canopy cover associated with a collapse in water quality and biological communities over the last 20 years. So all of that was kind of looking at the what changed and the how, and then we wanted to then expand off of this and try to predict that into the future, what might happen across our watershed. So I'm going to show you here is, again, each of our sites and catchments, and then I'm going to overlay the projected increase in climatic water deficit, just an anomaly, so departure from average at each of our sites. In this case, we're using 6 of the global circulation models that seem to match up really well with California projections and California data, and are also ordered kind of out of order, but from least severe projections on the left to most severe on the right. There's a couple out of order there, though. And so what we see is in our upper watershed sites, they're actually pretty stable in terms of projected aridity in the next 100 years. In our mid-watershed sites, we actually see some declines. And in our lower watershed sites, we see dramatic increases in climatic water deficit. We can then take this, plug it back into our model, and see what our changes in projected water quality may be. So those 4 variables that came out of our model, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, pH, and temperature, pretty stable at our upper elevation sites. But our lower elevation sites, pretty marked increases in conductivity, pH, and temperature, and a collapse in dissolved oxygen. Another way to look at this was to overlay our historical climatic water deficit variability and peak climatic water deficit. So warmer color means hotter in the past, larger means more variable. And this was useful for us to see how it wasn't just an elevation effect. So there are sites lower in the watershed that are actually more stable and cooler than sites in the upper watershed, and some sites right around downtown Nevada City in the middle that are both really variable and actually have gotten pretty arid in our 20-year record. But then when we overlay our projected increases in climatic water deficit, we start to get an idea of maybe some different sites for different management techniques. So our lower elevation watershed sites are both highly variable and projected to increase dramatically in climatic water deficit. So they're going to need the most attention in terms of adding in climate refugia, building in some additional resilience. Meanwhile, those mid-elevation sites that are highly variable are projected to decline in aridity. So maybe management there can focus on kind of preservation and maintenance of any climate refugia that's already there and maintaining kind of that canopy cover, which we might be seeing as more like a seasonal variability effect rather than an increase over time. So there's a couple limitations with this model. It was just like a proof of concept. The biggest limitation is the structural equation model, which is based on linear relationships. We want to take a different modeling approach with some nonlinear relationships in the future. We want to incorporate physical habitat because we know that microhabitat can dramatically influence climate refugia. Like I said, we used IBI scores. We do want to use the California Stream Condition Index scores in future runs, compare those to ours, and see what we get. And then finally, some of you may have noticed we use primarily climate projections and not land use projections for the current version. This is because land cover projections are a little bit more uncertain. So our next step is to incorporate a lot of that uncertainty by taking kind of the extreme ends of, change in forest cover, high end, low end, and then simulate what might happen if land cover goes in that direction. The last point I wanted to come back to was this weird relationship between NDVI and catchment scale forest cover. What we think we actually are seeing here is a little bit of a fire effect, as well as just the different measurement scales. A lot of our sites are in the lower elevation watershed, and on the top left image, we have our watershed in red and the burn scar of the 1988 49er fire in white. And we see that by 2001, it was mostly broadleaf shrub cover and a little bit of woodland. And then by 2016, 30 years after the fire, it had recovered and started to transition to coniferous forest. Coniferous forest actually has a lower leaf area and a lower canopy coverage than a lot of the broadleaf coverage that we might be getting by the stream within that fire scar. So we have to dig a little bit more into this, but we think we might be able to kind of use this tool to also look at fire data moving forward. So with all of that, I would like to thank 20 years wonderful volunteers. I think we're actually approaching our 2-decade point coming up where we hit it this year. Our water quality crew, bug crew, and all of the folks listed on this slide. And so with that, I will take any questions.
All right, thank you, Jeff. While everyone thinks about what questions they want to put into Slack for Jeff, let me ask one of mine. So Jeff, a lot of people have looked at the effects of land use and climate change and actually trying to predict the relative effects of each of those. Generally tend to show that land use really has more of an effect than climate change will. But you're kind of showing the opposite. What do you think is causing that?
I actually think it's probably more of just a watershed specific thing. Our watershed over our entire sampling period hasn't, to be honest, changed much in terms of vegetative cover and land use beyond the fire scar. There's some agricultural use lower in the watershed, but that's been pretty consistent over time. Um, yeah, a lot of it I think is just a lack of consistent change in land cover. So it's probably driving what's there, but maybe not necessarily the change because the land cover just hasn't changed much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you do you think that the fires you're talking about were incorporated in your land cover measurements, or?
Well, in our case, they weren't. We were just looking at vegetative cover. So we were looking at, yeah, it was basically just shrub cover or conifer forest cover, which we know lines up with the fire scar. We did not incorporate anything like burn severity or any of that kind of stuff in this version of the analysis yet. Yeah.
Okay. Are there other questions for Jeff? Well, people are thinking a bit more. One last one I have is I was actually a little surprised to see that in your ordination that the water quality seemed to be orthogonal to precipitation. Normally, I see precipitation, the dilution of precipitation tends to, move water quality around a little bit. Any insight of what's going on there?
Um, Honestly, not really. We had thought about that same thing. We want to incorporate things like flow and precipitation more directly in some other future analyses, but I mean, it could just be that our stream, we do have three regulated dams on the stream. So some sites are going to be much more sensitive to precipitation. And then some of our downstream sites, after really extreme precipitation events, are going to see some pretty dramatic responses to those precipitation events. But I can't really comment more on what else is going on there without digging a little bit more. Could just be, again, the nature of where our sites are relative to dams and things.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, so Jeff, I understand there's one more slide you want to present.
Oh, yeah. Go forward. Okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, I just wanted to let everyone here know, Sierra Streams Institute, we did unfortunately lose our office in the Jones fire in August of this year. So we are sharing this GoFundMe information to basically talk about what happened, things that we're looking for in terms of support. Want to give a really quick shout out to Eric Burrs for some really great help on replacing some of our instrumentation that was lost in the fire, both with temporary and long-term replacements. But basically, we are looking for any monetary support people are able to give through the GoFundMe here. Instrumentation support. So if you have old instruments that you're cycling out, we would love to take them on during our recovery and rebuild effort. And then finally, also just even collaborations. We have kind of a unique opportunity after losing our office and losing a bunch of our equipment to kind of recalibrate the way we sample and the way we operate. And so we're really interested in talking to folks that might be interested in working with the citizen science group that has our 20-year data set to try to come up with some new projects to work together and help us through our recovery. So if you have any questions about that or any ways you would like to help, please contact me via Slack or via email.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.